You're like, that I am paying that much per month. I've already looked. That's equating to a mortgage. A loan of about $330,000, and I'm trying to go zero down with the VA loan. So that's it. I'm not paying more. If you bring me something that's 340 or 350, and we can negotiate down because it's been on the market for a while, like that's great. But you need to set those budgets, because otherwise your loan officer and your agent, because their commissions are based on selling you the most expensive house you can afford to put you in the most amount of debt you can possibly take on legally, they're going to get you to overspend, and they're going to get you to break that budget. Welcome to Service and Wealth, the podcast dedicated to helping military personnel master their finances and achieve financial freedom. Our mission is to guide you through the ins and outs of planning, saving, and investing, and most importantly, how to balance savings so you can enjoy life now and retire with confidence. All right, let's go. Hey, welcome back to the show. This is your host, Ted Ahlert with the Military Wealth Coach, or more appropriately, the Military Wealth Coach. I use the royal we all the time, but we can just cast back the curtains, and if you hadn't figured it out, it's a one-person show, one-man show. This is something that I started to think about a little bit in my final months in uniform, and just kind of realized, for being I don't want to say a senior officer, right? Because when you're like 41, you don't really feel senior. But then again, when you're talking to 21-year-olds, I guess being 2x older does make you quite senior. But I realized, as I went through the last few years of my career, that, and this was even before my Marines or the midshipmen or whomever would learn about my background in finance and economics and investing in real estate, before they even knew that, right? The questions that I would get asked were it didn't matter if we were talking about like an E3 who's just had his 21st birthday and is definitely going to get out after that first enlistment, and maybe he's going to go back to college or maybe get a job, whatever. Like a young, 21-year-old midshipman, like a 24-year-old lieutenant, or even like one of my peers in their mid to late 30s. We essentially, our conversations in uniform on active duty always fell almost equally into one of three bins. And, and one was talking about leadership and management, dealing with personnel and personalities and projects and how to get things done. One was the full range of combat and lethality and weapon systems, everything from, talking about the weapons themselves to when do you think we're actually going to go use these against people, or do you really think that we could defeat, for example, like a modern military using drones, right? And then the other third was always what do I do about my personal finance? What's the TSP? How do I do that? And so, once again, like I kind of mentioned last episode, just in terms of a belief system I have, I called the podcast Service and Wealth. I titled the first book Service and Wealth, because these things go hand in hand. You can't just be like a fully altruistic person and be like, I'm going to go serve and die for my country, and I don't give a darn about what I make or my financial future or taking care of my family or leaving something for my kids or helping my parents when they're old and broken and are running out of money because Social Security is going to go bankrupt and they never saved enough. And, my mom, because the generation she grew up in didn't think women should be in the workplace but should be in the home. She never made a lot of money. There's all these different reasons and responsibilities that you won't really see until later in life, but they're going to exist. And my personal view and philosophy is that when I talk about service, I believe that Like, I have to serve my family, and I have to serve my parents, and I have to serve my community. And one of the ways that I can be an effective servant to them is by having the financial resources that I don't become a burden, and that I can actually be a source of strength and reassurance and provide them in their times of need. And the same goes for being in uniform. When you look at it, especially if you're at this point, if you're a senior enlisted, I'm thinking like E6s and above, or if you're an officer, a chief warrant officer, or warrant officer, sorry, all warrant officers, right? You're all welcome to the party. We have Marines coming through our door into our office all the time, and there are the high profile problems and problem children that have to do with drugs, alcohol, legal violations. But outside of that, those really like gnarly ones, you're going to put like your problems of leadership and managing people in one of two bins, and one is like relationships and marriages and things like that, and the other bin is personal finances and credit card debt, a repossessed car, bankruptcy, things like that. And we already know that about 52% of military marriages that break up, or relationships that end, say like the number one source of stress that led them to that point were finances. And it's, like about 43% amongst civilians. So, I mean, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that over half of the problems that we have with personnel who are dragging down on our time as leaders, as military leaders, who are themselves becoming, non-deployable, are in that bin because their finances are terrible. And so we've got this whole range of responsibilities as leaders, and it starts with simple things like, if you have even one person under your charge in whatever role, maybe you're like maybe I'm just poking fun at the Air Force, but maybe you're like a custodial officer, right? And you've got one person who helps you like clean up the office at 1400 before you go home for the day. It's just a perception. What? Even if you have one person, if you're not sitting down with your people at least once a year and doing like a 45-minute class on like how to understand your pay and your benefits and like a basic budgeting, and then as part of your annual or every 6-month counseling that you are supposed to be doing. Other service branches, it might be even more frequently, but like pretty much every 6 months for your juniors, and every year for people who are like have a few years in, like you're supposed to be counseling them, and that should include asking them very pointed questions about their finances. And there's a captain who was one of the in the Marine Corps. Officers go to the basic school, which at the time I went through was a 6-month, and now it's up to like a 7-month program. And this is before you even go learn your specialty, right? So a Marine officer will spend his first year in uniform just learning how to be an officer and how to do their job. And so when I was there at the basic school, there was a captain who was doing a Q&A, and we all really looked up to him. He was a Iraq War veteran and infantry guy, and somebody's like, how do you know, one of these other second lieutenants was like, how do you know, like, what's sort of like out of bounds for things that you ask or talk to your Marines about? And he was like, nothing. He's like, there's no such thing as intrusive leadership. There's only leadership. And in the military, if you are always drawing a line between like somebody's personal life and their personal finances and then like who they are at work, the things that happen unconstrained or uncontrolled or undirected in their personal life can totally wipe out who they are at work. It can ruin their career. It can degrade the readiness of the unit. It can defeat the morale of the unit. Like, bad things can happen, and it's all part of it. And so, for me, that's why the book title and the podcast is Service and Wealth. It's not Service or Wealth, or service with wealth or anything. It's they go hand in hand. And if you want to be the best you can be in uniform, you've got to have a rock solid financial base. You've got to have adequate savings for emergency funds. You've got to have enough money that you can get improve your life by becoming, a homeowner, or at least, getting in like a favorable housing situation, that you've got enough cash to start investing and building real wealth so that you've got some freedom and flexibility. Like the last thing that we need is, people sticking around at the 8-year or the 12-year or the 20 or the 30-year mark because financially they've got no options, right? Now we just have a bunch of mid-level and senior leaders in the military who they're only there for the paycheck, and you can tell, right? Like it shows their lack of concern and passion, and but they're there because they weren't in control of their finances. And so I think like being a good servant leader, but also just in general performing your duty and being good at what you're supposed to do in the military requires that you've got a rock solid financial foundation at home. And so that, that's just something I've been reflecting on, and, it goes hand in hand with my own money story, which was one of, being completely out of control all the way up until I was about 32, 33, 34. I think that's about right. Yeah, like it's been less than a decade since I've had like my stuff put together, right? It's more like about the last 8 years that went from being, 6 figures in debt with zero emergency savings, zero retirement savings, living paycheck to paycheck, sometimes having to like take a advance to pay my credit card bill, having $2,000-$3,000 a month in like car payments and other things with cars, and just like the stereotypical crap that plagues the finances of military, of service members, and it makes it so many of us just like get frustrated and have mental health issues and relationship issues, and it all comes back to just like being upside down and topsy-turvy. And like where I'm going with this is because this is I didn't say it yet, but you're probably expecting, or you read the title of this episode, and this is the second in our series on real estate in the military. The reason why and where I'm going with this is that it takes a long time to learn how to get control of your finances. It takes a long time to like figure out how much you should save, because at first you don't know, right? When you're young, you don't know even know where to look. Then you got to make some mistakes. You got to learn, through the school of hard knocks, because there's nobody there to like warn you. And so you just go out and make mistakes. And the whole time going through, like there's sort of this, it's not like the third rail, but like a lot of, mid-level and senior leaders in uniform who have a chance to be a really positive influence and a strong mentor and help our young people in uniform avoid making mistakes, avoid delaying until it's too late to start saving too little, getting into, bad debt situations, spending all of their BAH year after year on rent, and making, military landlords, like people like me and a bunch of my friends, like making us financially secure, right? Like, I'll take all your BAH on top of all of mine. But why not? Why would you not want to join that club? And so when I just kind of do like a post-mortem on my career, it comes back to two things. Like one, I had a lot of debt, and I was too stubborn to try to find a plan to get out of it more cheaply. I was very old school. I'm brought up by my dad, like, you just do it, and like, this is the way. And so I was paying a lot of money. But I also had those cars, right, and those huge car payments. And for the first decade of my time in uniform, really, starting a little bit before, I was spending way too much money, and I was saving nothing. But I had nobody to like teach me or help me. Imagine if I had spent, instead of $2,000 a month on car payments for a Range Rover and a BMW, right? Like, sounds funny to say, like, looking back at it, but if instead of spending that on those cars, which are no longer with me, which I still, when I sold them, I I think I broke even paying off the loan, right? So they were just money holes. Imagine if I had had a mentor who had come along at the very beginning and said, stop right there. And the first time I heard this was obviously on a Bigger Pockets podcast, where one of the originals with, Beardy Brandon Turner, like the founder of Bigger Pockets and like a real mentor and hero for a lot of people out there, including myself, even though we don't know him personally. He was like, the only car you need is $8,000. Everything you spend above that is just ego. And, I'm here to tell you that, yes, even in 2021 and 2023, like my wife and I were able to buy reliable, nice, used cars for $8,000. It's not like a joke that you can't do it anymore. Like they're still out there. You can still get by with it. And if I had had somebody to tell me that when I was in my mid-20s, man, for the next decade, I could have been spending $2,000 a month on like real estate payments or saving up for investment properties, right? That right there was $250,000 just like wasted on paying for loans and credit cards and cars that could have been reinvested in our financial picture and our portfolio. And so here I'm thinking like it's about time we talked about this and the great tools that you can use in real estate, especially when you're in the military, to save money, build wealth, and create life-changing, not just wealth, but income from your rental properties. And so that's where we are now this month here in November 2024, going into December, in which, we're going to do this multi-part podcast series on real estate. And, I didn't want to call it like, it's not dedicated to VA loans, right? We're going to talk about I kind of have this roadmap, like I'm kind of making it up as I go, because there's so much to talk about. We're going to have an episode, either the third or the fourth one. That is probably the fourth one. It makes sense to do the fourth one. That just goes through like the nuts and bolts, and like just the tiniest details about the VA loan, right? But the reason why I didn't want to just make this whole thing about the VA loan is because the VA loan has all these like particular nuances that you can only use it to purchase like a primary home. You can only use so much VA credit at any one time. We've got to talk about how loans get seasoned and how they get sold on the secondary market and restructured, and like how that allows you to refinance out and like reset your like there's a lot of mechanics that go into that. That if we only talked about that, like, well, we also got to talk about just what it means to buy real estate. We got to talk about what it's like out there, what you have to do with a mindset, what you have kind of actions you have to take, because just in addition to just all those specifics about the VA loan, and because of all those specifics and the limitations, you will not use it every time. You're going to need to learn how to use a mix of different funding and financing sources. And so that's why we want this, what I see as like a 5-part series is going to be all about military real estate. And the fifth episode, the capstone episode here on the podcast, is going to be walking through like a step-by-step strategy with like a timeline. And we'll have a blog post that goes with it with graphics. So you can we'll publish that the week prior, so you can like pull it up while you're listening. If you're not driving, if you're driving, probably don't look at it. But that'll give you the opportunity to say, oh, okay, so once I have like 2 months worth of LES statements, I now have proof of income, but I also need, if I'm an officer or if I'm enlisted and I have I rate basic allowance for housing, like now I also need to like that doesn't show up on your LES. You got to go get it like a separate letter that says this is how much BAH you get, because otherwise they're going to be like, look, your base pay, like we only care about taxable income, but you got to verify your BAH too. But you have enough to get started, right? And then you go out and you buy a house with a VA loan. Well, maybe like a year or two later, you want to buy another house, but it doesn't make sense to refinance. What are you going to do? You got to learn how to take techniques, and whether that's getting an investment grade loan or a conventional loan, you got to understand like the techniques and processes for going through it, so you can use it with any financing source. And so we'll look at doing that and kind of walking through. That's the end goal. Just being able to say, like, year 1, do this. Year 2, do this. Year 3, do this. Year 4, do this. Like, I promise, if you are serious about it and committed, you can buy a house every year over a 20-year career in the military, and come out just like, flush, right? So anyway, that's where we're going. But today, here in our second episode, we're going to kind of loop back and follow up to the first episode, but add a little bit more, what I would say, like, meat to the bones. I think that's how we like to call it. So before we get started and get into the actual main section here of today's episode, just want to thank everybody again for listening. If you're not, please subscribe. Please head over to whether it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts, where you can get download our every episode of the Service and Wealth Podcast and subscribe. It doesn't cost you. We don't charge for subscription yet. We probably should at some point because everybody else does. And then offer premium content, but like that's a bit above my pay grade right now. I'm, illiterate in this space of trying to be an online digital entrepreneur. But also, if you want to leave a 5-star review, that would be fantastic. And all it has to be is like, answered so many questions I had, feel way more confident, right? Like one sentence. But those 5-star reviews help push us up in the algorithm. And then other people out there who might not know about us yet, but are out on their phones and like looking for a podcast to listen to while they're working out or driving home, we'll start popping up in the search results at the top. And now we'll get more listeners and we'll get closer to achieving our mission of getting this information out to the entire force, all 1.284 million authorized end strength of U.S. military active duty. And then while you're at it, head over to www.militarywealthcoach.com. You can opt into our weekly newsletter, sign up for a free coaching session, spend about 40 to 50 minutes, maybe longer if we both have nothing going on afterwards, to talk about your questions and your financial situation and if there's anything I can do to help, even if that's just listening and judging your own opinions and strategies. And then also you can find links to all of our socials out there. So also, as we always got to do, give our disclosure. The content of this show is meant to be educational in nature. It's to help you learn the ropes about military finance in general, build your financial IQ. And as always, every investment decision carries risk. So do your own research, make your own decisions, and as always, own your own consequences. All right. And pay for help if you need a professional. All right. So last week in our first episode here, talking about real estate and the military, what we did is we kind of brought down the curtain, right? Or took the mask off, because most people, when they're thinking about real estate, they think about buying a house. And everything else is on the periphery. They're like, I want that house. I want that kitchen. I love that open floor plan and the fireplace where we could put my 87,000-inch TV above it and we can play, PlayStation 5 and Black Ops and whatever. I shouldn't say stuff like that because that's probably dating me, But, what we try to do is explain, like, that's not where it all starts. It all starts with the land. It all starts with the land and the ownership of the land. And that the ownership of that land is officially tracked by a deed or title. I tend to say deed. You might be more familiar with the term title. But this is a piece of paper, and it has 3 very simple components. It has a legal description of the property, and then it has a section that lists the current owner, and then it has who's like often called the grantor, or the person who will give the thing, and then there's a section for the next buyer called the grantee, the person who's going to receive it. And like that's it. It can just be on one piece of paper. Like you can do a full real estate transaction with one piece of paper that's got 2 signatures and the stamp from a notary public. It can be that simple. We talked about how it's the chain of ownership tied to that deed or that trust, the deed or that title, that is really, really important. And, as a quick refresher, we said is like, if you're going out there, like before you even get into the complexities of putting a house on it or like getting agents or getting a loan and getting banks involved and all of that other stuff, attorneys, title insurance, all that stuff, at the very beginning, like the most important thing that has to happen is you have to make sure that what you're buying is, you probably heard the term free and clear, right? Like free and clear, maybe you heard that with like buying a used car. If you've never bought a house before, if you bought a house before, you probably heard that term. And what it means is that you have to run a title report or a ownership and encumbrances report, and it just shows like, one, is the person selling you, are they the legal owner, right? You want to make sure they're the legal owner. And two, is it free and clear of other claims, right? So, and it doesn't have to be the person selling it to you. They might have made a mistake and bought it from somebody who didn't pay their taxes, right? And that's probably the most dangerous. If somebody doesn't pay their federal income tax, the federal government does not care. They will slap a lien, which is a claim, on whatever property that person owns. And if that person doesn't pay them back, they're going to take it. And a lot of people have a lot of heartbreak in this country because they think that maybe they can shortcut the system. They can save a couple $100 here by not doing a full titles research, by save a few thousand by not like having an attorney or doing getting title insurance. But then they lose it all, right? Because 2 owners ago, the person who sold it to the person you bought it from, they didn't pay their federal income tax for like 4 or 5 years. And the federal government slapped a lien on it, gave them 10 years to pay back. They sold the land to the person who bought it from them, and then that person like discovered sort of like accidentally like, oh, shoot, there's a tax lien on this by the federal government. That's bad. I'm going to get rid of this before I lose it. And they sell it to you, right? And so that's bad. County and state property taxes, that's another way that people can have liens against their land, and you want to find out about that. There can be mortgages or loans. Somebody might have borrowed money from the bank to do a rehab on their house, and they offered up the deed or the title to their property as collateral, right? And so you have to find out about that stuff. And only after you find out about that you can take legal ownership from the current legal owner of the land, do you start getting into the rest of it. And that's where you start to find out, like, okay, what's been built on there? How old is it? What quality is it? How much maintenance needs to be done? What's broken? What's been upgraded? How does it compare to everything else around you? And those are things that are discovered through the process of doing a building inspection or housing inspection, whatever you want to call it, of having a title officer doing the research on the ownership, of having an licensed appraiser, come in and look at it. And the one thing that you should notice by now is I have yet to say anything about a real estate agent. And I have several friends who are agents. I work with several agents. Several of my friends who are agents I work with, so like I'm not bad-mouthing any of them, because when you get into it and you start becoming a real estate investor, agents are really helpful because they've got great networks. They know their local markets really well. And if you try to do all that yourself, like let's just say, for example, that you are you just pin on like lieutenant commander in the Navy. You are a surface warfare officer, a SWO. So somebody goes out on like big ships, and you've been like a damage control officer, right? I think that's not the exact right acronym. I'm sorry, guys. There's like 3 of you every year. I should know it. You come through the academy and get that job, but you're in high demand, right? And you've been at sea for most of your career. The first like 8-9 years in the fleet, you spent like 2 years deployed. You came back, spent like 2 years at resident school. Then you went back out and you deployed for like 3 out of the next 5 years. And now you just pin on lieutenant commander, and you're looking at your brokerage account and your high yield savings account, and you're like, oh my gosh, I've managed to put away and then have my investments grow to like over $250,000. I really want to start diversifying, not by investing in bonds, which is generally like, unless it's like the early 80s, like it's a crap strategy. But I want to diversify into new asset classes, and I want to invest in real estate. I've discovered that I have enough cash to go and invest in multiple properties this year using investor grade loans. So I don't need to like go through the wait and find out with your typical loan officer. I've got the cash, but I need a team. And so I'm going to reach out to some of my agent friends back in, we'll just say in, Mayville, Florida, and Norfolk, Virginia, and somewhere in Rhode Island, right? Like Rhode Island only has one city, I think. I think it's the same thing. It's the city. I don't know, but it's small. But you want to reach out, and you use agents not because you necessarily need their help, like making the decision on what to buy, but you need their help in like teaching, educating you about the local market, right? But that's all. So like, again, I'm not saying when I say you can do all this stuff without an agent, I'm just kind of talking about like that one-off first purchase or investment that you can do yourself, right? But in the long run, agents are super helpful. You should have them on your team. They'll bring you deals. They'll get you inside off-market deals. They'll tell you what's bad, what works, and like save you a lot of time and headache and frustration and help you make money. But so anyway, with that like diversion there, as you're assessing the value of the thing you want to buy, you can call up a building inspector. Again, an agent's going to have one on speed dial on their phone, so that's helpful. But like every building inspector's got a website. One time I was working with an investor-friendly agent, and he was like, "Here, look, here's two different inspectors. I don't care. They're both as good. Whichever, you pick one, right?" So they don't, they're not like super invested, and you can just call up an inspector and pay for an inspection, and they'll come out and inspect your property. An appraisal, you don't even need to really pay an appraiser. You can wait for that appraiser to come out until the very end, like after a contract. But what you can do is you can do what are called like desktop appraisals. And they're pretty simple, right? Like if you're looking to buy a house, let's say in Virginia Beach, Virginia, like, hey, look, I want to look for a house that's less than $300,000, that has at least 2 bedrooms and 2 baths, and is within like a 1 mile radius of this like taco joint or like burrito stand, right? Because like they're the dopest burritos in town, and like I just want to be able to walk there and back, like no problem. And you start to filter, and then you put like with those on Zillow or Trulia or Redfin or whatever you want to use. Every property that you're finding on there has been listed by some selling agent on the multiple listing service, the MLS for that state, which means they put it up once and then it gets copied over to all these different platforms so they can get out and market their property to as many as possible. So just pick one that you like, go with it. Sometimes check and make sure it's legit comparing to other ones, but you set up these filters and you can look at it, and now you're looking at, sold in the last 6 months. That's always important. Put a timeline for the amount of time before you're looking that they were sold. Don't look at something sold a year or 2 or 5 years ago, just like in the last 6 months, because that's when usually things you can assume are going to be about the same for valuations and demand. And you can start to see like, oh, look, here's all the 2.2s in this neighborhood. They sold for $190. But if I cross over the creek here into this neighborhood, 2.2s are selling for $275. What's the difference? Is it the neighborhood? Is it the size? Is it that they're newer and they have better finishes? Oh, wait, they all have garages and like access to a common area because they're part of a townhouse and association. Like you can start to figure out your own local market and figure out what things are worth. Maybe you find that a 2.1 only sells for like 170. And now you can kind of say like, okay, an additional bathroom adds $20,000 in value. So what does that do for you? Well, now as you're out there shopping around for buying your first townhouse, condo, semi-detached, or maybe like small house, bungalow, you find like a 2.1 that's listed for $190, right? you can put in an offer for 170 and you can say like, hey, look, I appreciate you want 190, but in the last 6 months, there's not a single 2-1 in this city that sold for over 170. So you're not getting more than 170, but I'm making you a fair offer. Or maybe you find a 2-2 that's listed for 170 and you know that it should be worth 190. So you can like ask to come and do a showing and walk through it and pay attention and look at the water heater. Ask if you can see the heater air conditioning units. Take a look underneath the sink at the pipes. Try to find the electric panel and take a look in there and see if there's a date or like if it looks relatively new or if it's kind of like rusty and brown and old. Look at the finishes and the furnishings. Don't look at the the color of the counter. Like that doesn't affect the value. But just kind of get savvy. Look at when was the last time the bathroom was updated. Is it from 2005, which is not too bad. It's a little dated, but it's not terrible. Or is it from 1985, right? Like, and it needs serious work. And you'll be able to kind of like get this feeling of, I know in my market how much a 2-1 should cost, a 2-2 should cost, a 3-1 should cost, a 3-2 should cost. And I know if it's a house versus like a condo where it should cost. And now you can make fair offers, right? Or you can find out where there's potential deals. And where this comes in handy is obviously, like, again, I haven't said you can have your agent make you fair offers. I'm saying you can make fair offers, right? You can send an offer over to somebody. You can call a seller's agent and say, like, hey, I'm representing myself. I want to make this offer. You can even reach out to the person directly. I've made multiple offers person to person where I've just found them on, either they had a for sale by owner or I just took their name of the seller. You can find out who owns a property just by putting the address into like the local property records. It'll tell you the person, then you look them up on Facebook or LinkedIn and send them a message, give them a call, right? And you can make them an offer. And you now you have a good idea. You're not going to over offer, right? Like if it's really worth 170, it's listed for 190 because it's got shiny new microwave and stainless steel French door refrigerator in there. And you're like, oh, it's so nice. It's got everything new. Yes, I'll offer you 190. I'm not going to haggle. You get 2.5 weeks into the buying process with the bank. And then the appraiser comes out and they're like, it's only worth 170, man. Right? Like, what are you going to do? You just wasted 2.5 weeks. Or you're going to come up with $20,000 cash to cover the gap. You can save yourself a lot of time and headache by just having that, doing your own desktop appraisals and getting it sorted. If you are working with an agent, and again, I strongly recommend you work with an agent the first couple times that you buy a house, just so you can kind of like learn the ropes and like have somebody else to look at and like bounce ideas off of. But they're also, as we said last week, like you're not their only client. They are going to be going full throttle, doing whatever their broker tells them. Agents have to have a brokerage that like sponsors them so they can keep their license and practice. And they're going to be going full throttle to try to make as many sales as they can because they get paid commission and they have to split that commission, right? So, if they get a 3% commission on a $200,000 house, that's $6,000 commission, but they got to give at least half of that to the broker, right? So you might think that the agents are eating well if they're taking in these commissions, but like they're splitting it. It's a little bit harder than it might seem, especially in certain markets. But if you've got this good idea of the local market appraised value of properties and like what adds value and what doesn't, you have a very important thing. And if you watch football and you picture like the NFL coach is like irate, stomping up and down the sidelines, or sometimes they're just really confused and they do not know what just happened. Most likely that's 31 different NFL coaches when they're playing the Kansas City Chiefs, and they're just wondering like how Patrick Mahomes, who doesn't even have a speck of green on his uniform, has gotten the other team whistled for like roughing the passer 7 times, right? Like you're like, how does this happen? So they throw the challenge flag, right? When you know how to do appraisals off the desktop, like just getting on Zillow and what things are worth, you can throw the challenge flag at your agent. And that, when I go back to the first couple houses that we purchased, man, I wish I knew how to do that better, right? Because we found ourselves, like there was a gut feeling like, I think we're overpaying for this, but it's really nice. And sure enough, once the appraisal came through like $40,000 less than the contract price. And it was a battle, and it cost us, over a week of extra time. It cost us more money to get a second opinion appraisal, and like eventually we managed to make things work with a little extra cash out of our pockets. But when we went into it, our agent had been like, this is actually a great price because this is a premium property. This is like luxe, finishes and builds. Like, you're not going to find a better house than this in this neighborhood. I think you should just offer asking, right? And our gut was like, oh, seems a little steep, right? But we didn't really have a good technique to counter what the agent was telling us. Now, in hindsight, we go back and we'll be working with agents, and they'll say like, hey, here, they'll slide across like, here's the comps. Here's 3 comps that we think work for this property you're thinking of purchasing. I can look at it and in a matter of 5 or 10 minutes say like, oh, I agree with you, or actually, I think you're off by like 10K or whatever because of the amenities or square footage or the neighborhood, it allows us to make a better offer when we're buying real estate, right? So these are things, that we talked about as being just sort of parts of it. Like last week, we said you have to find out the condition of the building on the land for the property you're buying, and that's a building inspection. And you have to find out what the value is relative to other properties in the neighborhood, and that's the appraisal. And, today what we're trying to cover is that you can do these things yourself. You can get pretty darn close. And so you don't have to go like all the way in. You can actually, if you wanted, you could start today, even if you're not ready to buy a house until next summer, but you've just PCS'd to a new duty station. You could say like, every weekend I'm going to go out and I'm going to look at 2 properties. And within my general limits, which is 2 to 3 bedrooms, 1 to 3 baths, within this, 1 mile of this place, and built no earlier than 1958, right, or whatever the case may be, and just start going and looking at them. You don't have to get an agent. You can send a contact form, call up the listing agent or the seller and just be like, hey, I'd like to come by and look. I'm not working with an agent right now. Maybe I will work with you. That's usually what it takes to get in the door, is say like, I'm looking to be represented. But I'm cautious. I'm not really sure. I want to just get somebody off the internet. So maybe you could tell me more about what you do while you're showing me these places, and then they'll tell you they think they're going to get your business. Like, who cares? Like, it's a land of white lies, right? So tell your own just to get yourself in the door and start learning the ropes for the industry. But let's say you get, so now you've done your homework, right? Now it's May, April, May of 2025. Now, you're in a military town, so you know that there's a lot of turnover in the summer. And, you also know that a lot of folks who are military families, who are homeowners, have this nasty habit of selling every time they leave. Instead of slowly and steadily building this portfolio of wealth and income-producing rental properties, they buy a place. When they PCS, they're like, oh, I'll sell it. I don't want to deal with the 1 email a month from my tenant who actually is, an E7 who's going to check into my unit next month anyway, and is somebody I know from 8 years ago. Like, oh, I don't trust them. Oh, I'm going to be annoyed by an email. Oh, I don't know how to set up automated rent collection and direct debit through apartments.com or Zillow.com. Like, it's not hard, right? You shouldn't be intimidated. I guess that'll probably be in January that we finally get to talking about how to do, property management for yourself, especially in military communities, and why being in a military community makes it so much easier. But anyway, it's April, May. You're 2 or 3 months before PCS season, and so it's about time that all these folks who are going to be PCSing out of town are going to start listing their properties for sale. And now would be a great time to get serious about buying. Over the 6 months between now and then, maybe you save an extra $1,000 a month, that you were putting towards emergency savings or a new car. Maybe you put that aside in a different account just to have a little bit extra cash to help you with this home purchase you're going to make next summer. And you're ready to go out and get an agent broker, right? And so here is, today this is like one of the most important things, because what we keep saying in every dimension of your financial life is it's critical that you take control, right? If you're in the military, even if you're an E1 or an E2, at some point, whether it was a boot camp or when you first showed up, maybe as a poolee, like at some point you were given a position of responsibility and leadership. There's nobody in uniform who's never had that. So you at least have like a little sliver of an idea of what it takes. And the more senior you go, and once you're NCO or an officer, a warrant officer, like you really start to understand what it means. You run a team at work. You run a team at your unit. When you go out to buy a house, you need to run a team. And it's kind of like a fire team, right? Like it's mostly going to be you, an agent, a loan officer at the bank, and then like an escrow officer or title officer at the title office, right? Like it's kind of like the four of you working together, and everybody's got roles and responsibilities, but you're the one who's putting the money on the table. You're the one who's going to take this property. You're the one who's going to take on the loan. You're the one who's going to live there. You're the one who's going to have to deal with the consequences after closing if there are problems with the inspection, with the safety, with the quality of the home. And so you need to be in charge. Don't be like, well, I've never done this before. Like, I'll whatever you say, man. Like, don't do that. Be in charge. And so that all starts at the very beginning, before you even make an offer. You got to set the tone, and you got to pick the right team. And so when you are getting ready to buy a house, and I totally recommend the first couple times you do it to use an agent. Maybe use an agent every time. Up to you, right? But you got to set the tone from the beginning. You take control. And the way you can do it is ask some simple questions, right? Because what you're probably going to do is it's not going to be like very scripted. It's going to be like kind of random. You're just going to be looking at houses on Zillow at night with like football or Netflix on in the background. And eventually you're going to see one that you're like, this is it. I want to buy this house. Perfect location, looks awesome. I want to go see it tomorrow. And you're going to fill out the little contact form, and then you're going to get like an email, a text, and an automated call from an agent. Maybe a personal call, right? But they're going to be straight in, like smelling blood, going for the kill. Like, oh yeah, hey, this is great. Maybe you could send me like what you're looking for. Like, I got a loan officer I want you to introduce you to. I'll get you their contact. They can find out like how much loan you can get, and then we'll go out there. We'll set you up for some showings and blah, blah, blah. And it goes on and on. You just need to say, hey, pump the brakes, sir or ma'am. I'm active duty military. Can you please tell me your experience working with VA loan buyers? Like how many in the past year? How many sales have you closed using a VA loan? What % of your client over the past 5 years have been service members using a VA loan? Ask some questions. You need to find out, right? And it shouldn't be too hard, but you would be surprised. I recently talked to a former student of mine who was trying to buy a house in a strong military community who fired 2 different agents because they had no clue how to handle a VA loan or to help out him and his wife, right? You would think like, oh my gosh, this is a military community. Everybody must be able to use a VA loan. No, it's not true. And he deserves so much credit because he knew exactly what he wanted. And when those agents couldn't deliver, he was like, sorry, on to the next one, right? He did it perfectly and deserves all the credit. Is a role model, right, for everybody out there doing their first time home purchase. But ask the questions. Make sure you feel comfortable that they know what you need and what you're using and as a service member and all that. Then the next question you need to say is, how familiar are you with VA loans? Specifically, do you know properties that are approved for VA loans? Now, what does that mean? Well, the VA, because and we'll get into this in a future episode, specifically what all this means, but because they're guaranteeing 25% of the value of that home to the bank, so that if you die or you go AWOL or just can't pay the loan, the VA is going to back you up for 25%, right? So the bank will loan you, and that's why you can get 0 down. As a result, the VA is taking on a big chunk of responsibility, so they have what are called minimum property requirements for safety and habitability of the house. So you can't have your agent taking you to see rundown fix and flips. You can't have your agent taking you to see 100-year-old, places that they've had lipstick slapped on a pig, so they've got brand new, kitchens, bathrooms, and flooring, but the foundations are cracked and they've got lead pipes and old electrical and wouldn't pass the NPR, right? Your agent's going to waste your time if they're not familiar with that and not taking you to the right properties. You should ask, hey, do you know if you have in your back pocket somebody who is an appraiser who's certified to do VA appraisals, right? So, again, we'll talk about the implications of that in a future episode, but and like we said last week, we made the mistake of not asking that question, and we had an appraisal done by a non-VA certified appraiser, and when it went past the bank just fine, the seller was fine, we were fine, and when it got to the VA's like, oh, doesn't count, you got to go find somebody else to do one that we will review because that appraiser didn't know the minimum property requirements, right? So make sure that the team that the agent's going to network you into as far as an appraiser, specifically an appraiser, is one who's already connected with the VA, certified, and then why not ask them how long will it take you, right? That's another great question. How long is it going to take us to get an inspector out there once we have an accepted offer? How long will it take you to schedule an appraiser? What is your average length of time to close a house? Now, close means, so you put an offer on paper, you get it, quote unquote, like under contract, which means that the sellers, accepted your offer and you've both signed off on some paper through DocuSign saying like, I will pay you this much under these terms. They agreed. And now we're going to start this whole ball rolling of, O&E reports, inspections, appraisals, etc., bank underwriting. It should be able to be done in 30 days, 30 to 35 days. Like that is totally competitive sweet spot. But if your agent's like, we don't really have any VA appraisers who we work with regularly, that's a red flag because it's going to take them extra time to get that person out there. If they're like, well, usually we can get it done pretty close to like 35 days, but sometimes it's 45 just because like, the bank's not that familiar and we have some problems with VA. Like another red flag, like make them not sell you, but convince you that they have their VA battle drills on lockdown and will help you out. And then ask them about their lender, right? Like, okay, you said you have a loan officer, right? A bank. Like, who are we going with? And I'd like to reach out and speak with that loan officer directly. A lot of loan officers, they really just want to kind of like run through the paperwork and like they're just going to email you and be like, I need these 18 documents and I need them in the next 30 minutes so I can take the next step on your loan. And you feel like you're constantly getting like just like run ragged by them. Before you even get to that point where you've put in an offer and you're trying to qualify or pre-qualify on a loan, just get their contact, call them up. Don't send an email; they won't respond to you, most likely. But call them up and be like, "Hey, look, I'm working with agent so and so. Said that you're a good VA loan officer to work with. I just have a couple questions for you, and I want to make sure that we're on the same page." And some of those you might say like, I'm a first-time VA loan user. What is going to be my funding fee? And can you please tell me any other out-of-pocket costs for using a VA loan with your bank, right? Now, the funding fees, we'll get into it again in a future episode, but they're fixed amounts that you have to pay the VA as part of the loan in order for them to give you that zero down or low down payment benefit and all the other advantages with like VA loans having lower interest rates than traditional 30-year loans. But that doesn't mean that there aren't some other fees that the bank is going to tack on there for additional underwriting, who knows, whatever, right? So like just ask them about any additional out-of-pocket costs. If you're a veteran and you have at least 10% disability, you are exempted from those funding fees. So you should ask, if you're a veteran in this case, tell them like, hey, look, I appreciate what you're saying. I just want to let you know I have a 50% disability. And then like stop right there and see what they say. If the loan officer says, oh, that's great, the funding fee will be waived for you, so it'll be even cheaper, then you're like, yes, this guy or gal knows what he or she's talking about, and you feel confident. If they're just like, okay, yeah, so anyway, how much do you qualify? Like if they just breeze past it, maybe they're not that familiar with the VA loan. Then here's the you also want to ask them about their connection with a VA appraiser, right? Because for them, that's really important. Once they get all this work into pre-qualifying you and starting to like earmark the funds to like lend to you, they really get annoyed if you get all the way to like day 28 and an appraisal comes back and they got to start over, right? Because especially once you get past a month from when you first got pre-qualified, they're probably going to have to redo all the qualification letter, right? So you should ask them, hey, do you have a connection with a VA appraiser? And if so, like how long does this person take to get out? And if you had any problems before with the appraisal coming in low, just these are good questions to ask. And I think this is, we might do like kind of an unconventional blog post in the next week or two in which we just make like a checklist instead of like an article. We'll just make a checklist of like questions to ask various people who you'll be working with in a real estate transaction. And then this is then you have one other big responsibility once with this loan officer and being in charge of your team, being in control. And that's once you just make the decision that, yes, I want to work with this agent, I want to work with this bank and this loan officer. They all check out. They understand the VA loan. They understand my needs. They're listening to me. I think we're going to work well together. The first thing that loan officer wants to do, and again, loan officers are going to get compensated and they're going to get rewarded and they're going to get promoted on the total volume, which means like the total dollar amount of loans that they write. Why is that? Because the banks make profit in the form of interest on the loans. So one loan officer, they could go out and they could write like a $3 million loan to some admiral who just moved into town, right? And whatever. And then there could be another loan officer who wrote 20 $300,000 loans to a bunch of E7s and O2s, right? And chief warrant officers. Well, that person who went with all the low-hanging fruit, they didn't get the big, shiny, like massive jumbo loan, but they got all these little ones, and they brought more volume, which means more interest payments, which means more profits for the bank, which means more commission for them. So they're always trying to push that up. And so what you need to do is before you actually finally commit and start, tell people what you're going to do, is you need to figure out how much you can afford, right? And that's why we talk about the iCash budgeting system here at the Military Wealth Coach is you start out with what you want. You figure out how much you need to save for retirement, how much you need to save for emergency savings, how much you need to save for potentially like financial freedom or like transitioning out of the military. And then after that, you start taking away your housing costs, your transportation costs, your food costs, your utilities, right? And then you're going to be left with a certain amount in your budget that you could use to take on new debt, that you could take on a mortgage. Now, in the post-2008 housing crash world, post-2010, to be specific, since the Dodd-Frank Act, lenders to residential mortgage applicants, people like you and I, have to limit what they can loan you so that your total debt to income ratio is not above 0.43, which means if you make $100,000 a year, you can't have more than $43,000 a year in debt payments, or slightly less than, that's like $3,500 a month. So if you have no other debt and you just hand over your LESs and your BAH certification, you're an E7, E8, O1, O2, whatever, and you give it over to this loan officer and they look at it and they're like, oh, they make $100,000. We can approve them up to a DTI of 0.43. That's $43,000. That's $3,500 a month in a mortgage payment. And they're going to come back to you and say, congratulations, you can go out and, you can afford this $500,000 house. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. I didn't do the math, so that might not be exactly right now at current interest rates. But now your loan officer is going to try to pre-qualify you for $500,000, and your agent's going to try to sell you a house or get you to buy a house that's $500,000. But maybe because you use an iCash budgeting system that's focused on balance, where you're saving enough for retirement, where you have enough in your emergency savings, where you have enough extra cash left over each month to save up to get a new car in 2 years, where you have enough extra cash each month to like go on a trip each year as a family. Maybe you only want to spend $2,400 on housing. And maybe you've figured out that you want to go for that sort of optimal sweet spot of 30% of your total income, pre-tax income on housing, and that's $2,400, right? So you need to be able to know that and have that budgeting done. Get online, go to like Bankrate, do a mortgage payment calculator, and just move the dials around to see what the purchase price of a house is with 0% down VA loan to get your monthly payment at $2,400 or less. And then when you go back to your agent, you tell your agent like, hey, don't bring me anything over $330,000. And they'll be like, oh, well, you might be able to afford more. And you say, no, I'm not paying more. That is my budget, my monthly PITI, which is principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, which is usually your total mortgage payment includes all of that. So it's kind of like saying that's total mortgage is PITI. You're like, that I am paying that much per month. I've already looked. That's equating to a mortgage. A loan of about $330,000, and I'm trying to go zero down with the VA loan. So that's it. I'm not paying more. If you bring me something that's $340 or $350, and we can negotiate down because it's been on the market for a while. Like that's great. But you need to set those budgets because otherwise your loan officer and your agent, because their commissions are based on selling you the most expensive house you can afford to put you in the most amount of debt you can possibly take on legally, they're going to get you to overspend. And they're going to get you to break that budget. And then you're going to have to dial back on your savings for a new car. You're going to have to stop putting money into the college fund until you get a promotion. You're going to have to stop saving for emergencies or vacations. You might even have to like skip some contributions to your TSP, which is like a mortal sin in the world of personal finance, right? Like you've got to save for retirement and your emergency savings before you do anything else. And so that's really important to be able to, again, you're kind of like the quarterback or the fire team leader and telling your loan officer and your agent right then and there, this is how much I want for a house. If you can find me something less, I will buy less if it's still checks the boxes. But most people get that backwards. They go in, they say, okay, I want 3 bedrooms. I want a bonus room for like a gaming / workout room. We want 2 baths, 2 full baths upstairs. It'd be nice to have like a half bath on the main level for guests. We'd like an open floor plan. We want a, new finished kitchen. We would like to have a patio where we can like sit out, ideally a screened in patio, maybe connected to like a deck with a barbecue on it, and we'd like a fence so we can have our dog running around, and we need 2-car garage, and a shed would be nice. And like they list all this stuff, and then they go to the loan officer and they give the loan officer all of their LESs and their BAH paperwork and their spouse's pay stubs, and the loan officer's like, we couldn't qualify you for $525,000, and now the agent just goes out and tries to get you everything you want for $525,000. And now you're broke. You're going paycheck to paycheck again because you took on too much debt and you started backwards. Instead, figure out what you can afford on a monthly basis, figure out how much that equates to in a total loan, and then tell the loan officer that's how much you want, and tell your agent that's your limit. The loan officer still might go through the process of pre-qualifying you and giving you a letter that says you're qualified for up to $525,000. Okay, so what? Just be careful with that, right? Because if you're making offers on a house and your agent's like, hey, the seller would like to see proof of funds. They want to make sure that you can afford and you're pre-qualified for this house before they agree to a sales price. Don't show them, like if you're negotiating, if you want to, they're listed for $330 and you want to pay $325 and you're trying to get it down $5,000, and then you give them a pre-qual letter saying you can afford $525, what do you think that seller's going to do? They'd be like, no, it's really tough. We can't really quite come down. We've got good offers at 3:30, but if you go 3:30, we can work with you. And they're lying. They're lying to you, right? So you should probably make sure that your agent understands how people work and, sign a contract, get an offer accepted, and then show them your pre-qual letter to reassure them that you'll be fine. But again, this is, we're up to the point here of needing to wrap this up today. Today was really just talking about, obviously we had our little bit of soapbox at the beginning, but today was really talking about like how to work with your people as you put together a team to go out and start buying your first home or becoming a real estate investor. The questions you need to ask and the vetting you need to do with your agent and your loan officer before you move forward so that you can make sure that you get the deal you want, that you have people on your team who you can trust and who will work in your best interest, and that you have people who are experienced working with service members, veterans, and the VA loan so that they don't put you in a situation of, having a house go out of contract because the appraisal comes back and it doesn't line up, missing timelines because it takes too long to get an appraiser out there, having to delay purchase or even cancel contracts because you couldn't get a VA appraisal done or approved. There's a lot of different things out there to be aware of. And again, like I said, we'll summarize these show notes in a sort of a blog checklist form posting that we'll get out here in the next couple weeks. And it can kind of just be your playbook that you take with you as you go forward and start to either purchase your first or your next house. All right, next week, I think what we'll do is I want to talk a little bit about, so next week in part 3 of, real estate for the military or military real estate, whatever we're calling it, I want to come back and I'm going to start, again, we're not going to jump right into the VA loan and talking about like the very specifics because it can quickly get out of control, right? But what we're going to talk about are a few things further dealing with the teams. And we're going to talk about sellers, right? And it can be really hard to convince a seller to sign a contract with you if you're using a VA loan because there's misconceptions out there. There's skepticism, there's doubts about VA loans. There's people have biases about what they think about military members, that they don't make enough, that they won't be able to afford the house, right? And that they're going to sign a contract and then you're going to like back out. There's lots of things you got to overcome. And again, these are part of being in control of your finances and like coaching your team, telling your agent, hey, I want you to communicate these 3 things to the seller so they understand about who I am, what I'm doing, where I am in life, and what I can afford, right? To get rid of their doubts about VA loans and selling to service members. And then we're also going to talk about like fees and commissions and costs and closing costs so that by the end of our 3rd episode, by the end of the next one, you will have understood all of the pieces that go into a real estate transaction. You will have a script and checklist for how to screen your team and put together a good team of an agent, loan officer who are going to work with you and for you and get you the right tools so you can use that VA loan. And then you're going to know what to expect in terms of costs so that there's no hidden costs up there, there's no surprises. And you know that when we talk about like a 0 down purchase, you don't actually get away with free, right? Like there's still costs. And we'll break all that down, including commissions in today's real estate market, which have changed. In 2023, there's a Supreme Court case that changed everything. And, there's more knowledge that you got to have today than before. And then that way we'll have done like all of these like crawl and walk bits. And then in episode 4, we'll come back and we'll talk about the very specific ways that the VA loan can be used and the things you got to look out for. And then in our final 5th segment, we'll talk through that strategy because now you'll know how to do your own due diligence, your own desktop appraisals. You know how to build your own team, the questions to ask, how to use the VA loan. And now it just comes to taking all that knowledge and putting it into a blueprint or SOP that you can use to go out and buy lots of real estate. All right. I had fun. I hope you learned something. I hope you had fun too. Real estate's great, especially if you're in the military. It's probably the number 1 career and investment combination to becoming wealthy. in America today. Like subsidized zero down loans, buying real estate in stable, sustainable, and growing communities in coastal states like North Carolina, California, Florida, Virginia, Texas, with an never-ending sustainable flow of future tenants, with all of the people who will be PCSing into your unit every summer from here until the end of time. There's no excuse not to do it. All right, thanks for joining me. Until next time, stay financially fit and mission ready.